They told you Neville Goddard was just another mystic, speaking of dreams and invisible realms. But what if I tell you his voice carried the quiet thunder of a man who saw imagination not as fantasy, but as the very engine of reality itself? This is how it unfolds. In lecture halls across New York in the 1940s and 50s, Neville stood before ordinary men and women and proclaimed that the secret of life was not effort or luck, but assumption. This is where the revelation begins. He declared that what you inwardly claim as true, even without evidence, must one day manifest in the outer world. This is why it matters. Neville wasn't giving you a comforting idea. He was giving you a law of consciousness that governs everything you experience, and I will reveal why it still shakes the foundations of modern spirituality today. This is the turning point. Unlike other teachers, Neville didn't tell you to plead with a distant God. He told you that your own imagination was God in action. This is how the illusion deepens. People thought he was blasphemous. Yet those who tested his words discovered strange coincidences bending reality toward their inner assumptions. This is where destiny is rewritten. Neville saw man as God, dreaming in human form, temporarily forgetting his power until he dared to assume and awaken. This is how freedom announces itself. When you realize your life has been molded not by chance, but by the states you have dared to occupy inwardly. This is why doubt loses its grip. Because even skeptics who applied his methods found their inner convictions mirrored back in startling ways. This is how the stage is set. Neville's legacy spread through his books, lectures, and recordings, surviving decades after his passing in 1972. This is where the spark catches. Young seekers stumbling upon his words today feel as if they've uncovered buried treasure. This is how the world shifts. Entire communities online now dissect his teachings, treating imagination not as wishful thinking, but as the true creative act. This is why his voice endures, because it speaks not of belief in external forces, but of trust in your own inner authority. This is where the curtain lifts. Neville shows that heaven and hell are not future destinations, but present states of consciousness. This is how clarity dawns. Your assumptions, repeated and felt as real, are the blueprint from which life unfolds. This is why he matters now more than ever. In an age of uncertainty, his teaching hands you the reins of authorship over your own story. This is where the mystery deepens. He taught that even the Bible was not history, but a coded psychological drama of the human soul. This is how courage is born. Once you accept that imagination is divine, you stop living as a victim of circumstance. This is why the story begins here. To understand the law of assumption, you must first meet the man who dared to tell you that you are God imagining the world into being. Can you imagine hearing for the first time that the very fabric of your reality bends not to effort or struggle, but to the assumptions you dare to hold as true? This is how the revelation takes shape. Neville Goddard declared that assumption is not a casual thought, but a living seed planted in the fertile soil of consciousness. This is where the essence crystallizes. He defined the law of assumption as the principle that what you inwardly claim and feel as real must eventually harden into fact. This is why it strikes the heart. It removes the randomness of life and replaces it with the certainty that consciousness creates. This is where the boundaries collapse. Neville insisted that you do not attract by begging or yearning. You manifest by assuming and persisting in the state of the wish fulfilled. This is how the current shifts. Assumption is not daydreaming, but a disciplined acceptance of a reality unseen until it materializes. This is why evidence follows conviction, because the outer world is only a mirror reflecting the state you occupy inwardly. This is where the paradox stirs. Most people believe reality shapes their thoughts, but Neville reversed it. Thoughts assumed as real shape reality. This is how freedom begins to whisper. If assumption governs all, then you are never trapped, only dwelling in a state you have the power to leave behind. This is why persistence matters. Wavering assumptions scatter seeds, while steady ones take root and bloom. This is where the stakes rise. To assume is to accept responsibility for everything unfolding in your life. This is how clarity cuts through confusion. Neville said consciousness is the only reality, and assumption is the mechanism by which it operates. This is why it unsettles, because it means no one else holds the pen that writes your story but you. This is where destiny bends. When you choose a new assumption, the universe begins rearranging itself to match your inner conviction. This is how the unseen becomes tangible. Imagination fused with feeling is the substance from which matter takes form. This is why Neville's words echo with finality. Assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and live in it. This is where the call deepens. He did not mean someday. He meant now, for the assumption itself is the seed of transformation. This is how certainty becomes power. When you live as though it is already true, the world cannot help but comply. This is why the law of assumption is the cornerstone. It is not theory, but the law by which all creation is born. This is where our story moves forward, into the distinction that separates Neville's vision from every other teaching about manifestation. Picture for a moment the countless voices that speak of the law of attraction, telling you that like attracts like, but rarely asking you to question the deeper root of what generates attraction itself. This is how the veil parts. Neville Goddard did not speak of attraction as a magnetic pull of thoughts, but of assumption as the creative command of consciousness. This is where the line is drawn. The law of attraction suggests you wait for energy to align, while the law of assumption demands that you claim alignment as your present state. This is why it shifts the foundation. Attraction implies hope and waiting, but assumption insists on identity and being. This is where the contrast intensifies. Those practicing attraction often try to manipulate external vibrations, but Neville showed that the inner state is the vibration itself. This is how the illusion cracks. People chase techniques, rituals, and signs, while ignoring the simple act of assuming they already are what they seek. This is where the turning grows sharper. Attraction positions you as someone reaching out, while assumption positions you as someone already in possession. This is how the landscape changes. Neville never told you to look for signs. He told you to rest in the end as though the sign had already fulfilled itself. This is why it matters to distinguish. Attraction leaves room for doubt. Assumption closes the door by embodying the result before it appears. This is where the current quickens. One is passive waiting, the other is active claiming. This is how power flows back into your hands. You realize the world is not pulling something toward you. You are pushing the world outward from your assumed inner state. This is where clarity burns. Neville said the law of assumption is the only law, and all talk of attraction is secondary to consciousness itself. This is how the horizon expands. If assumption is primary, then you are not at the mercy of energy fields outside you, for all fields are shaped by your awareness. This is where the simplicity resonates. You need not ask how to attract love, money, or health. You need only assume that you are already the one who has it. This is how certainty begins to grow. The world bends to your conviction, not your desperation. This is where confusion dies. Attraction teaches you to look outward for response. Assumption teaches you to look inward for command. This is how sovereignty feels. You recognize yourself not as a beggar of vibrations, but as the author of reality itself. This is where the torch passes. Once you see the difference, you stop waiting and start being. This is how the future bends to the present. When you embody your assumption now, the outer world can do nothing but obey. This is why the journey continues. To dive deeper into the force Neville called imagination as the very face of God. Now consider this. Neville Goddard stood before his audience and told them without hesitation that the creative force they prayed to, begged from, and worshipped outside of themselves was none other than their own imagination. This is how the thunder rolled in his words. He declared that God is not a distant being in the heavens, but the very faculty by which you form images, feel them as real, and give them life. This is where the shock settled. People accused him of blasphemy, but he calmly reminded them that Scripture says Christ in you is the hope of glory. This is how the ground shifted. Imagination, once dismissed as fantasy, became revealed as the divine workshop where realities are born. This is where the light pierced through. Neville's conviction was not metaphorical. He meant literally that your imagination is God in action. This is how the illusion broke. Those who dared to test his claim discovered that inner pictures assumed as true began unfolding in their external lives. This is where the power roared. He described imagination as the eternal cause, and the outer world as nothing more than its effect. This is how the mirror was revealed. Every circumstance, good or bad, was only the shadow cast by the images held within. This is where resistance fought. The mind clings to the belief in accidents, luck, or fate, but Neville insisted there are no accidents, only assumptions crystallized. This is how courage emerged. The moment you accept imagination as God, you reclaim authorship of your life. This is where the responsibility strikes. If imagination is God, then every idle image or fearful vision is also a prayer answered. This is how clarity unfolds. Neville told his listeners to pray by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, for that is the only true prayer. This is where destiny softens. Imagination does not demand sacrifice or ritual, it only demands belief in its reality. This is how liberation begins, when you realize that the same power that created the universe lives in the private theater of your mind. This is where awe builds. Imagination is not a toy, but the eternal architect constructing every detail of your days. This is how certainty feels. No longer do you question if God hears you, because you know imagination and God are one. This is where faith becomes real. Faith is not waiting for miracles, it is assuming the miracle is already yours and letting imagination shape the evidence. This is how the silence deepens. Neville taught that in stillness and sleep, imagination works most powerfully, moving the unseen to create the seen. This is where the story pushes further. Once you accept imagination as God, you begin to see consciousness not as limited, but as the only reality. This is how the journey ascends. From here we step into Neville's bold declaration that nothing exists outside of consciousness, and everything begins within. Suppose you discover that the ground you walk upon, the sky you gaze into, the people you encounter, and even the challenges you face are not external truths, but reflections of your own inner states of consciousness. This is how the unveiling begins. Neville Goddard declared with absolute conviction that consciousness is the only reality, and all else is its shadow. This is where the illusion shatters. The material world that feels so solid is nothing but consciousness objectified. This is how the current deepens. Every event, every meeting, every so-called coincidence is birthed first within awareness before taking form outside. This is where the power ignites. Once you realize this, you stop blaming the external and begin sculpting the internal. This is how the mirror sharpens. Life is always showing you who you believe yourself to be. This is where accountability stirs. No one else is responsible for the contents of your consciousness but you. This is how liberation beckons. The moment you shift consciousness, the external must eventually follow, for it has no choice. This is where resistance trembles. The ego clings to the idea of chance, luck, and external control, but Neville dismantled this illusion mercilessly. This is how the truth stands tall. There is no power outside of consciousness because nothing exists outside of it. This is where the paradox glows. Even the doubter doubting Neville is still creating from the state of doubt, proving the law by denying it. This is how the horizon opens. Once you see consciousness as the sole source, the universe becomes pliable clay in your inner hands. This is where responsibility becomes destiny. The quality of your consciousness determines the quality of your life. This is how the inner world rises. Imagination, faith, and assumption are not luxuries but the tools of creation itself. This is where certainty emerges. You understand why Neville insisted that you already are what you seek, for consciousness precedes experience. This is how the silence speaks. When you dwell quietly in a chosen state, the outer begins to echo it in form and circumstance. This is where freedom breathes. No matter how fixed things appear, they cannot stand against a changed state of consciousness. This is how the story sharpens. To master life, you must master assumption, for assumption is the bridge from consciousness to reality. This is where Neville's voice still resounds. Consciousness is not passive awareness, it is active creation. This is how the thread pulls us deeper. Having seen consciousness as the only reality, we now turn to the precise way assumption works as the mechanism of creation. Envision a world where your inner state does not merely reflect life, but actively shapes it, bending every circumstance to match the assumptions you dare to hold as real. This is how it unfolds. Neville Goddard taught that assumption is the act of claiming a state as true, feeling it fully, and persisting until the outer world mirrors it. This is where the mechanism clicks. It is not wishful thinking, but the deliberate inhabitation of a chosen reality. This is how the magic begins. The mind, once convinced and emotionally aligned, sends ripples through consciousness that eventually crystallize in form. This is why the moment matters. The first spark of belief ignites a chain reaction that no external event can stop. This is where power resides. The law does not negotiate with circumstance, it merely manifests what is assumed inwardly. This is how the process clarifies. Feeling the wish fulfilled is the key, for thought alone cannot compel reality. This is where the resistance falters. Doubts act as weeds, but a steady assumption becomes a tree whose roots cannot be uprooted. This is how the outer world responds. Your outer life is a faithful reflection of your inner assumptions, revealing them with precision. This is where the certainty strengthens. Persistence in the assumed state acts as gravity pulling reality toward itself. This is how the mind becomes sovereign, no longer reactive. It now dictates events by the state it occupies. This is where clarity pierces the veil. Neville emphasized imagination fused with emotion as the operative force of creation. This is how the invisible becomes visible. Assumptions, once vivid and felt, gradually solidify into tangible results. This is where the freedom deepens. No longer are you a passive spectator. You are the director, writer, and actor in the theater of your life. This is how the law asserts itself. It responds not to desire, but to the unquestioned assumption of truth. This is where skill is required. Practice living as if fully until the outer world can no longer deny it. This is how transformation accelerates. The mind, habituated to the new state, begins to organize experiences around it automatically. This is where the beauty lies. No external magic is needed, only faithful persistence in the inner reality. This is how destiny is rewritten. The chosen assumption, once fixed and felt, reshapes every circumstance it touches. This is where the next layer awaits. Having understood how assumption works, we move into the indispensable component Neville calls feeling, the secret behind its potency. Think of the moment when mere thought transforms into tangible reality, and you realize that it is feeling, the emotional force behind imagination, that propels creation into existence. This is how the core reveals itself. Neville Goddard insisted that thinking without feeling is like planting a seed without water, destined to wither before sprouting. This is where the distinction strikes. The mind can conceive endlessly, but only emotion gives birth to manifestation. This is how the law awakens. The intensity of feeling impresses the subconscious, which in turn orchestrates the outer world to match it. This is why subtlety matters. Even fleeting emotions, if deeply experienced, ripple through consciousness with unstoppable power. Magic intensifies. Happiness, gratitude, and the sense of fulfillment act as magnets drawing corresponding realities toward you. This is how clarity sharpens. The feeling must be so real internally that the outer cannot contradict it. This is where doubt trembles. Persistent alignment of feeling with assumption overcomes external evidence to the contrary. This is how the current flows. Imagination alone is incomplete without the emotional conviction that it is already true. This is why embodiment transforms life. Your inner reality, emotionally charged, becomes the template for the universe to follow. This is where the secret unfolds. The subconscious does not differentiate between imagined and experienced feeling. It only knows intensity and truth. This is how persistence becomes power. Repeat the emotional state until it saturates consciousness and leaves no room for opposing beliefs. This is where the inner world dominates. Circumstances adjust automatically because the feeling has claimed authority over reality. This is how resonance aligns. Outer events harmonize with the vibrational state of your sustained emotion. This is why Neville emphasized living in the end. To feel as though the desire is already accomplished ensures it moves from imagination into fact. This is where the method crystallizes. The combination of vivid assumption and charged feeling creates unstoppable momentum in life. This is how freedom is asserted. The feeling itself is the bridge between invisible thought and visible manifestation. This is where discipline meets art. Cultivating the appropriate emotional state requires practice, repetition, and faith. This is how the ordinary transforms into extraordinary. Mundane moments, once infused with felt assumption, become the agents of your desires. This is where our journey moves onward. Having discovered feeling as the secret, we now explore the natural unfolding of manifestation, the seed time and harvest that Neville describes. Ask yourself what happens when the seed of an assumption is planted in the fertile soil of consciousness and left to grow unseen, yet with unwavering faith that it will one day emerge. This is how the rhythm reveals itself. Neville Goddard compared every assumption to a seed that requires time, attention, and emotional nurturing before it bears fruit in the outer world. This is where patience becomes power. You do not rush the harvest. You honor the invisible process that shapes reality from within. This is how the law quietly works. As long as the inner state is sustained, every moment moves the unseen toward inevitable manifestation. This is why persistence matters. Scattered belief is like scattering seeds on barren ground, but focused assumption produces inevitable results. This is where the magic lies hidden. Life may appear inert or slow, yet beneath the surface, consciousness orchestrates every detail in accordance with your assumed state. This is how clarity arises. Every external delay is a part of the maturation of the seed, not a denial of its eventual fruition. This is where faith deepens. Once you grasp seed time and harvest, you cease worrying about timing or method, trusting the process within. This is how the current strengthens. The subconscious, faithfully reflecting your inner state, moves imperceptibly to align circumstances with your assumption. This is where doubt loses its authority. Impatience is the enemy, persistence the silent ally of manifestation. This is how precision emerges. The more vividly and consistently the seed is imagined and felt, the faster and more exact the harvest appears. This is where the unseen orchestrates the visible. Every encounter, event, and opportunity is arranged to nurture the growing seed of consciousness. This is how the law proves itself. The seed never fails to produce, provided the gardener, the conscious mind, tends it faithfully. This is where transformation accelerates. What began as an idea within becomes reality outside, often in ways beyond imagination. This is how patience becomes a weapon. Resisting the urge to check or doubt strengthens the unseen threads binding cause to effect. This is where life bends gracefully. The universe conspires silently, aligning all elements to bring the inner assumption into visible form. This is how mastery emerges. Understanding seed time and harvest removes the need for external control, for the inner process is infallible. This is where empowerment grows. You learn to cultivate states and feelings, knowing each one plants seeds that will inevitably mature. This is how inevitability dawns. Once the seed is sown and the state maintained, manifestation becomes not possibility, but certainty. This is where the next layer awaits. Having grasped the rhythm of seed time and harvest, we turn to the essential role of faith in sustaining and completing the creative cycle. Consider the possibility that faith is not mere belief in something unseen, but the deliberate inner certainty that the assumption you hold is already an accomplished fact, radiating through every fiber of your being. This is how the principle takes root. Neville Goddard insisted that without unwavering faith, no assumption can fully mature into external reality, because doubt introduces fractures in consciousness. This is where power consolidates. Faith is the stabilizing force that bridges imagination with the visible world, allowing the seed of assumption to grow unchallenged. This is why persistence is essential. It is not enough to assume once or twice. Repeated return to the inner state nourishes the unseen until manifestation is inevitable. This is how the law clarifies itself. Faith is the mechanism that keeps the subconscious aligned with your chosen state, despite contrary appearances. This is where courage emerges. External setbacks become irrelevant because faith refuses to acknowledge them as authority over your inner reality. This is how certainty becomes tangible. The inner conviction radiates outward, subtly rearranging circumstances to reflect what is already true within. This is where resistance dissolves. Fear and skepticism lose their grip when faith is unshakable and persistent. This is how momentum builds. Each moment lived in assumed faith strengthens the invisible threads, connecting imagination to form. This is why the process cannot be rushed. Faith requires endurance, patience, and complete trust in the creative power of consciousness. This is where clarity pierces the veil. The universe does not need to convince you, it responds naturally to the authority of your sustained belief. This is how alignment manifests. People, events, and opportunities begin to appear as if orchestrated by an unseen hand, yet it is the hand of your faith-infused assumption. This is where the magic flows. Even when outer evidence contradicts desire, unwavering faith maintains the inner reality, ensuring the eventual harvest. This is how inner power rises. By living as if, you cultivate a state that the world cannot help but obey. This is where freedom asserts itself. Faith frees you from dependence on chance, timing, or external validation, because the assumption itself carries the force of inevitability. This is how the law proves itself over time. Repeated practice of faith transforms imagination into life, creating results that appear miraculous but are simply natural law in action. This is where certainty radiates. The more deeply faith is felt, the less room remains for fear or hesitation. This is how the inner life governs the outer. Your faith-saturated assumptions become the blueprint for reality. This is why Neville emphasized it relentlessly. Faith is not passive hope. It is active consciousness commanding its own manifestation. This is where the next revelation waits. With faith as the engine, we move into Neville's revolutionary method of revision, rewriting past experiences to reshape the present and future. Envision a life where past mistakes, regrets, and painful memories no longer hold sway over your present, because you have discovered the power to rewrite them at will through the imagination. This is how the method reveals itself. Neville Goddard taught that by revisiting past events in your mind and imagining them as you wish they had unfolded, you can alter the impressions they left on your subconscious. This is where transformation ignites. The act of revision is not denial but reclamation, giving your present consciousness dominion over every memory. This is how the inner world shifts. Each reimagined scene impresses the subconscious with a new narrative, replacing old limitations with empowering assumptions. This is why the process is potent. The mind cannot distinguish between vivid imagined experiences and lived ones, so it integrates the revision as truth. This is where freedom expands. Old fears, anxieties, and failures lose their grip because they have been rewritten and neutralized within consciousness. This is how destiny bends. By altering the inner record, you influence all future events that would have flowed from unaltered memories. This is where clarity sharpens. Revision is not a one-time act, but a repeated practice, revisiting scenes until the emotional resonance aligns with the state you desire. This is how subtlety becomes power. Even minor adjustments, when felt as real, ripple across consciousness to produce substantial outer changes. This is where courage deepens. The ability to revise the past frees you from victimhood, giving you authority over your personal narrative. This is how momentum grows. Each revised memory strengthens the alignment between assumption and reality, accelerating manifestation. This is why Neville stressed imagination over logic. The subconscious responds to the imagery of experience, not to rational explanations. This is how persistence becomes art. The act of revisiting and re-feeling past events ingrains newsday states as the foundation of future outcomes. This is where liberation resonates. No external circumstance can contradict a fully revised inner state, because it governs all perception. This is how power consolidates. The mind becomes an instrument of intentional creation, rather than a passive recorder of events. This is where the law demonstrates its precision. Every imagined alteration subtly reorders the inner world, which in turn reshapes outer reality. This is how belief strengthens. By rewriting the past successfully, you confirm the authority of imagination over experience. This is where the future bends. Revision ensures that no past failure can dictate future limitation. This is how the unseen orchestrates the visible. Memories reconstructed with feeling ripple forward, aligning life with the assumed state. This is where the next revelation awaits. Having mastered revision, we now step into Neville's principle of living in the end, the cornerstone of the law of assumption. Picture for a moment that every desire, every dream, every goal you hold has already been accomplished, and you exist fully in the state of fulfillment before any outward evidence appears. This is how the principle comes alive. Neville Goddard taught that living in the end is the secret to manifestation, for the outer world must obey the state you inhabit within. This is where the illusion dissolves. Most people live in longing and anticipation, but living in the end places you firmly in the reality you wish to create. This is how power flows inward. By embodying the fulfilled state, your consciousness radiates a template that the universe must reflect. This is why timing loses meaning. The moment you assume the end as real, the manifestation becomes inevitable, moving toward you with invisible precision. This is where persistence crystallizes. You must return repeatedly to the state of fulfillment, for consistency strengthens the imprint on your subconscious. This is how certainty grows. Doubt weakens the inner signal, but unwavering presence in the end state ensures the subconscious acts as a faithful agent. This is where imagination wields authority. The feelings and awareness of already having what you desire are the true instruments of creation. This is how freedom emerges. You are no longer a petitioner, waiting for circumstances to change, but a sovereign inhabiting the desired reality. This is where alignment is enforced. The external world adjusts subtly, arranging events, people, and opportunities to conform to your assumed state. This is why embodiment matters. Thoughts alone are insufficient. It is the lived experience of the fulfilled state that compels manifestation. This is where clarity sharpens. Every choice, every action becomes guided by the internal reality of the end, rather than by external appearances. This is how the law demonstrates elegance. The subconscious recognizes only the current state, not whether it is real outside. This is where courage strengthens. To live in the end is to defy appearances, trusting inner truth over outer evidence. This is how momentum builds. The longer you inhabit the end state, the more rapidly circumstances converge to mirror it. This is where sovereignty is asserted. The world must adjust to your consciousness, for nothing can resist the inner conviction fully realized. This is how subtlety acts. Living in the end transforms casual moments, interactions, and decisions into instruments for actualizing the assumed reality. This is where certainty radiates. Persistence in the end state erases conflict, dissolving contradictions between desire and perception. This is how mastery unfolds. Living in the end is not a technique, but a lifestyle. A seamless integration of inner and outer reality. This is where the next layer emerges. Having learned to live in the end, we now explore the dynamic power of shifting states of consciousness to navigate and design every aspect of life. Can you imagine that every experience, every triumph, every setback you encounter is merely a reflection of the state of consciousness you occupy at any given moment, and nothing exists outside this inner reality? This is how the landscape unfolds. Neville Goddard taught that life is not a series of random events, but a continuous flow of states, each producing its own corresponding external world. This is where the illusion fades. Poverty, sickness, success, or joy are not imposed from outside. They are the inevitable expression of your prevailing inner assumptions. This is how power asserts itself. By intentionally shifting from one state to another, you gain control over the trajectory of your life. This is why awareness matters. Most people are unaware of the states they inhabit, drifting passively while circumstances mirror unexamined beliefs. This is how mastery emerges. Recognizing and consciously choosing your state allows you to dictate not only outcomes but the very quality of your experience. This is where the current deepens. States are not superficial moods, but potent, persistent conditions of being that shape thought, emotion, and action alike. This is how alignment solidifies. By dwelling consistently in elevated states, you magnetize circumstances that resonate with those vibrations. This is where subtlety transforms life. Small shifts in consciousness ripple outward, reorganizing relationships, opportunities, and even health. This is how persistence strengthens power. Repeated return to chosen states ingrains them in the subconscious, making manifestation effortless. This is why the law is exacting. Your outer life cannot rise above the dominant state you occupy inwardly. This is where freedom expands. Understanding that states are the architects of reality releases you from the tyranny of external conditions. This is how clarity sharpens. You begin to notice patterns, triggers, and habitual states that either support or sabotage your desires. This is where control becomes intuitive. Choosing a state is like selecting a channel. and the world begins broadcasting in accordance with that station. This is how the unseen orchestrates the visible. The emotional and mental tone of your consciousness arranges people, events, and circumstances in alignment with your dominant state. This is where empowerment resonates. The more consciously you navigate your states, the less chance and accident govern your life. This is how momentum unfolds. By mastering states, you prepare fertile ground for assumptions and feelings to take root with maximum potency. This is where sovereignty grows. Life ceases to happen to you because you now operate from intentional, chosen states. This is how reality becomes pliable. The outer world must conform to the inner conditions you maintain with fidelity and emotional investment. This is where the next revelation awaits. Having seen the power of states, we now turn to the subtle yet transformative force of inner conversations, the dialogue that continuously scripts your assumed reality. Ask yourself what happens when the words you speak to yourself in silence carry the weight of your beliefs, shaping your perceptions, decisions, and ultimately the world around you. This is how the truth unfolds. Neville Goddard emphasized that every inner conversation is an assumption spoken, a declaration of what you believe to be true, whether consciously or unconsciously. This is where the invisible exerts authority. Repeated dialogues within your mind impress the subconscious, which then arranges life to correspond with these assumed realities. This is how power asserts itself. Casual self-talk, doubts, or complaints act as seeds of limitation, while deliberate, affirmative conversations become instruments of creation. This is why attention matters. Unobserved thoughts gain momentum, manifesting circumstances in perfect accordance with their tone and intensity. This is where mastery emerges. By consciously directing your inner dialogue, you choose the narrative that governs your outer experiences. This is how freedom grows. Negative feedback loops from fear or insecurity lose their influence when replaced with conversations grounded in desired states. This is where subtlety wields force. Even fleeting mental statements can set processes in motion, rearranging events in alignment with your inner convictions. This is how clarity strengthens. The more consistent and emotionally charged your inner conversations, the faster the outer world responds. This is where the law proves itself. The subconscious cannot differentiate between imagined or spoken realities. It merely executes the scenario impressed upon it. This is how resilience is cultivated. Even in adverse circumstances, sustained inner dialogue aligned with the wish fulfilled overrides external appearances. This is where influence ripples outward. People, opportunities, and synchronicities shift to mirror the tone and content of your assumed conversations. This is how certainty manifests. When your inner words reflect unwavering faith and feeling, reality adapts, bending effortlessly to your narrative. This is where alignment consolidates. Habitual inner conversations stabilize the states of consciousness that support desired outcomes. This is how the invisible orchestrates the visible. Every event becomes a reflection of the script silently spoken in the theater of your mind. This is where sovereignty flourishes. External forces are powerless against a mind disciplined in its self-dialogue. This is how momentum accelerates. The subconscious executes continuously, whether you consciously direct it or not, amplifying the effects of consistent inner speech. This is where empowerment takes root. Mastery over inner conversations equals mastery over external circumstances. This is how subtle influence compounds. The smallest shifts in dialogue reverberate through reality, producing profound results over time. This is where the next revelation awaits. Having grasped the power of inner conversations, we now explore Neville's transformative I remember when technique, a method that shifts past, present, and future through assumption. Picture for a moment that you can step into memory as if it were a canvas. And by revisiting the past with intention, you can reshape not only how you remember events, but how they influence your present and future. This is how Neville Goddard's I remember when technique comes alive. He taught that by imagining past events as if they had already aligned with your desires, you rewrite the script of your consciousness. This is where transformation begins. Recalling a moment and feeling it differently impresses the subconscious with a new state, one that guides reality toward fulfillment. This is how subtle power operates. The mind cannot distinguish between genuinely lived events and vividly imagined, emotionally charged experiences. This is where freedom blooms. By changing your memory's emotional tone, you release old limitations and open the door to new possibilities. This is how the inner world directs the outer. Assumptions anchored in revised memories propagate outward, reshaping circumstances and relationships. This is why consistency matters. Repeated engagement with the technique strengthens the new state, making it the dominant thread in your consciousness. This is how clarity sharpens. You begin to see how the past has secretly governed your present, and how revision liberates you from that invisible rule. This is where momentum builds. Each altered memory acts as a seed, sending ripples through time and experience. This is how sovereignty asserts itself. No longer are you victim to past events, for you can reinterpret them to align with your desired outcomes. This is where courage strengthens. Revisiting painful or limiting memories becomes an act of empowerment, transforming fear into authority. This is how the unseen organizes the scene. Circumstances begin to shift naturally, reflecting the revised assumptions now embedded within. This is where subtlety wields its force. Minor emotional shifts during memory revision create disproportionate changes in external reality. This is how alignment consolidates. Your revised inner landscape harmonizes with your chosen states, accelerating manifestation. This is where the method proves itself. Seemingly fixed realities adjust seamlessly as your subconscious accepts the new script. This is how persistence becomes transformative. Frequent use ingrains the new assumptions so thoroughly that outer events must comply. This is where mastery emerges. The technique not only alters perception of the past, but actively shapes the flow of your present and future. This is how certainty radiates. Once applied, the I remember when technique removes doubt about the power of your imagination. This is where the next revelation beckons. Having learned to rewrite the past, we now turn to Neville's profound use of biblical principles, interpreting scripture as a psychological map of human consciousness. Envision a world where the stories of the Bible are not rigid historical accounts, but living maps of consciousness, revealing the psychological laws that govern every human experience. This is how Neville Goddard reinterpreted scripture. He taught that every character, every event, and every miracle is a symbolic depiction of states of mind and inner assumption. This is where the veil lifts. The Red Sea, the Promised Land, and the miracles are not distant events but dramatizations of the inner journey from limitation to fulfillment. This is how the principle clarifies itself. By reading the Bible as an allegory of consciousness, you uncover the mechanisms of imagination and assumption at work. This is why it resonates. Each passage becomes a guide to mastering your own inner world, showing how thought, feeling, and faith produce tangible outcomes. This is where the power awakens. Scripture is transformed from moral instruction into a blueprint for active creation. This is how insight strikes, understanding that faith the size of a mustard seed refers to the inner conviction necessary to manifest assumed realities, gives new life to familiar words. This is where revelation deepens. Neville insisted that Christ represents the consciousness within you, not an external savior, pointing to the divine creative power inherent in imagination. This is how clarity sharpens. Every story, miracle, and parable becomes a lesson in how assumptions shape experience. This is where the current flows. The inner world, guided by consciousness, produces the outer, mirroring the biblical drama in everyday life. This is how mastery unfolds. By applying these principles, you learn to live consciously in accordance with the laws that the Bible illustrates symbolically. This is where freedom expands. No longer dependent on external forces, you recognize that God, imagination, and consciousness are one and the same. This is how momentum grows. The more you interpret Scripture as a psychological guide, the more your assumptions align with the outcomes you desire. This is where subtlety exerts force. Each parable or miracle becomes a mental tool for shaping perception and directing inner states. This is how empowerment manifests. The Bible ceases to be a passive story and becomes an active manual for creating reality. This is where the unseen orchestrates the visible. The inner laws symbolized in Scripture begin to govern your external circumstances effortlessly. This is how certainty is established. By living according to these principles, you witness consistent alignment between assumption and manifestation. This is where clarity intensifies. Scripture's true message is not obedience, but consciousness mastered and assumed with feeling. This is how insight becomes application. Understanding the psychological symbolism prepares you to wield the law of assumption with precision and authority. This is where the next revelation awaits. Having seen biblical principles as psychological tools, we now examine real-world success stories that illustrate the law of assumption in action. Can you imagine ordinary people, just like you, transforming their lives completely by applying nothing more than the law of assumption, shifting their inner states, and seeing the outer world obediently follow? This is how reality bends. Neville Goddard shared countless anecdotes of students who, through assumption and feeling, manifested wealth, love, career success, and even miraculous health recoveries. This is where inspiration strikes. A man living in poverty imagined himself as prosperous, and within months, opportunities appeared that matched his inner state with uncanny precision. This is how the law proves itself. A woman who longed for reconciliation with her estranged partner assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and events unfolded naturally, guiding the relationship back to harmony. This is where momentum grows. Each story demonstrates the seamless connection between inner assumption and outer manifestation. This is how clarity emerges. The principle does not discriminate, whether the desire is material, emotional, or spiritual. The law of assumption operates consistently. This is where courage awakens. These stories show that no circumstance is fixed, and every life can be reshaped through conscious inner work. This is how the unseen orchestrates the visible. Subtle mental shifts create ripple effects, producing outcomes that appear miraculous but are merely natural law at work. This is where empowerment deepens. Each individual story confirms that mastery of inner states is sufficient to command life itself. This is how precision manifests. Success follows not random chance, but deliberate, emotionally charged assumptions sustained over time. This is where faith strengthens. Seeing others succeed reinforces belief in the method, allowing new practitioners to embody the same states with conviction. This is how persistence compounds. Repeated practice builds momentum, making manifestation faster, clearer, and more exact. This is where insight sharpens. The outer world serves as a mirror, reflecting the depth and fidelity of one's inner assumptions. This is how subtlety exerts its influence. Even small, consistent shifts in consciousness produce disproportionately large effects in life. This is where authority is reclaimed. Practitioners learn that the power to create lies within, and external events are secondary. This is how inspiration fuels action. Each story becomes a roadmap, showing that imagination and feeling are sufficient to reshape reality. This is where the law demonstrates elegance. Nothing is coerced. The world aligns effortlessly with the inner state assumed. This is how freedom is reinforced. You need no special tools, no rituals, only faithful engagement with your chosen inner state. This is where certainty blooms. Repeated evidence confirms the universal, reliable operation of the law of assumption. This is where the next layer awaits. Having seen examples of its power, we now explore the obstacles that prevent consistent use and how Neville taught to overcome them. Think of the moment when doubt creeps in, uncertainty whispers, and fear seems to sabotage even your most determined attempts to assume your desired reality. Yet Neville Goddard insisted, these are natural tests of persistence. This is how the challenge manifests. Distractions, disbelief, and conflicting emotions act as barriers, threatening to scatter your assumptions before they take root. This is where clarity emerges. Awareness of these obstacles is the first step, for what is unseen cannot be addressed. This is how power reasserts itself. By deliberately returning to the chosen state of consciousness, you neutralize the disruptive influence of doubt and fear. This is where persistence becomes essential. Repeated reassumption strengthens the subconscious impression, making external resistance powerless. This is how subtle sabotage is handled. Inner conversations of fear or complaint must be caught and replaced immediately with assumed truth. This is where freedom grows. Recognizing that obstacles are temporary and malleable restores confidence in your inner authority. This is how momentum recovers. Each time you consciously choose the desired state, The law of assumption recalibrates circumstances to match. This is where insight deepens. Impatience, skepticism, and comparison are common enemies, but awareness allows you to redirect attention to the fulfilled state. This is how mastery consolidates. Obstacles are not signs of failure, but markers guiding you to refined focus and emotional alignment. This is where faith proves itself. Sustaining the inner state despite apparent contradictions reinforces the subconscious conviction that drives manifestation. This is how clarity sharpens. Understanding that resistance is part of the process prevents distraction from derailing progress. This is where momentum accumulates. Each conscious correction compounds the power of assumption, reinforcing the creative process. This is how subtlety rules. Even fleeting alignment with fear weakens manifestation, while immediate return to the chosen state restores strength. This is where authority is reclaimed. The more obstacles you overcome internally, the less power they hold externally. This is how freedom asserts itself. Life can only mirror what you consistently assume, so vigilance becomes the key to mastery. This is where courage solidifies. Overcoming inner resistance builds the confidence necessary to inhabit any desired state without hesitation. This is how the process becomes effortless. Repeated awareness and correction train the mind to maintain the chosen assumption automatically. This is where certainty radiates. Obstacles are no longer threatening, but expected signals that your inner work is unfolding. This is where the next revelation awaits. Having conquered these barriers, we now explore the transformative role of imagination in shaping not just personal reality, but relationships and environments. Envision a world where the people, places, and circumstances surrounding you are not fixed realities, but reflections of the states you occupy within, bending and shifting in harmony with your consciousness. This is how Neville Goddard revealed the principle. Imagination is not a private escape, but a creative instrument that shapes your environment to match your assumed state. This is where the magic unfolds. By vividly imagining interactions and scenarios as already aligned with your desires, you magnetize circumstances that correspond perfectly. This is how subtle power manifests. Relationships, opportunities, and even the flow of events respond to the tone, feeling, and conviction you maintain internally. This is where clarity strengthens. The outer world is a mirror, constantly reflecting the dominant state of your consciousness, whether constructive or limiting. This is how momentum accelerates. Consistent imaginative practice impresses the subconscious, which orchestrates the environment to mirror inner assumptions. This is where freedom expands. No longer are you at the mercy of random events. Your inner focus dictates the landscape of experience. This is how alignment manifests. Small, deliberate visualizations create ripple effects that shape interactions, opportunities, and circumstances in surprisingly precise ways. This is where empowerment deepens. Imagination allows you to craft not only personal reality, but also the dynamic interplay of relationships and social settings around you. This is how clarity sharpens. By assuming positive outcomes and feelings toward others, you influence their responses without direct control or manipulation. This is where momentum grows. The more your inner state embodies the desired reality, the faster and more seamless the outer world adjusts. This is how subtlety wields force. Minor shifts in expectation and emotional tone ripple outward, restructuring the environment in alignment with your consciousness. This is where sovereignty asserts itself. External chaos cannot dictate your experience when your imagination dictates the internal landscape. This is how insight deepens. The quality of your interactions mirrors the quality of your assumed states, highlighting areas for refinement and conscious choice. This is where clarity resonates. Living in deliberate imagination ensures that the outer world becomes an ally rather than an obstacle. This is how mastery unfolds. You realize that the environment is not fixed but responsive, and your inner states are the keys to its design. This is where freedom radiates. The more you inhabit assumed states with conviction, the more effortlessly circumstances arrange themselves to your liking. This is how momentum consolidates. Imagination, feeling, and assumption combine to produce consistent, reliable outcomes in the outer world. This is where the next layer awaits. Having shaped environment through imagination, we now examine the culmination of Neville's teaching, living effortlessly as a conscious creator in every aspect of life. Envision a life where creation flows naturally, without struggle or force, because every thought, feeling, and assumption aligns seamlessly with the reality you wish to experience. This is how Neville Goddard described mastery. When you fully inhabit your chosen states, the subconscious acts automatically, manifesting your desires without conscious strain. This is where freedom radiates. You no longer battle circumstances or chase outcomes, for your inner world has already determined them. This is how the rhythm unfolds. Effortless creation is not passive waiting, but a state of inner assurance and sustained feeling of fulfillment. This is where clarity shines. Each moment becomes an opportunity to maintain the assumed state, knowing the outer will inevitably follow. This is how momentum amplifies. The subconscious, perfectly aligned, orchestrates events, people, and situations with precision and grace. This is where subtlety exerts its power. Small shifts in mood or imagination ripple outward, subtly adjusting reality in favor of your inner state. This is how sovereignty is established. Nothing external can displace the authority of a mind, fully aligned with its chosen assumption. This is where courage solidifies. Challenges no longer intimidate, because the inner state is unshakable and the world is compelled to respond. This is how alignment becomes effortless. Every desire and interaction flows from the inner conviction already realized. This is where empowerment deepens. The need for control, struggle, or persuasion fades as creation is guided by conscious assumption. This is how clarity sharpens. Life itself becomes a reflection of your inner mastery, validating the law of assumption continuously. This is where momentum consolidates. Each sustained state builds upon the previous, creating compounding manifestations across all areas of life. This is how subtle influence governs. The quality of consciousness radiates outward, gently reshaping environment, relationships, and circumstances. This is where certainty blossoms. Knowing that the outer must reflect the inner allows complete confidence in unseen outcomes. This is how insight strengthens. Effortlessness is achieved not by doing more, but by being fully in the end state. This is where freedom resonates. The outer world becomes a cooperative reflection of your inner reality rather than an adversary. This is how mastery is expressed. Imagination, feeling, and assumption converge to produce a life lived in alignment with divine creative power. This is where the journey reaches its zenith. Conscious creation becomes a natural, effortless expression of your identity as the author of your reality. This is where the next section awaits. Having explored effortless creation, we now conclude with the ultimate understanding of Neville's law of assumption and its enduring legacy. Ask yourself what it means to fully embody the truth that imagination is God, consciousness is reality, and assumption is the bridge between inner desire and outer manifestation. For this is the culmination of Neville Goddard's teaching. This is how the final revelation settles. The law of assumption is not a technique or a temporary tool, but a way of life, a total alignment of thought, feeling, and awareness with the reality you choose to experience. This is where clarity deepens. Every circumstance, relationship, and event in your life is a mirror of the states you inhabit, and mastery comes from conscious, sustained assumption. This is how power radiates. Understanding that every inner state carries creative authority frees you from fear, limitation, and external control. This is where momentum solidifies. Once the law is internalized, your imagination and feeling operate continuously, sculpting life effortlessly and precisely. This is how subtlety becomes genius. Even imperceptible shifts in belief, expectation, or emotional tone produce ripples that transform entire realities. This is where sovereignty shines. You become the unquestioned authority over your personal universe, commanding manifestation without struggle or striving. This is how freedom resonates. The outer world ceases to dominate or define you because inner conviction governs all perception and creation. This is where insight clarifies. The Bible, dreams, memories, and imagination all serve as instruments, guiding you to harness consciousness as your creative tool. This is how mastery is affirmed. Repeated use of assumption, feeling, and imagination produces consistent, undeniable results, validating the law in every area of life. This is where courage deepens. Fear of uncertainty or opposition loses all power when your inner states are aligned with the end already fulfilled. This is how alignment becomes effortless. The subconscious obeys without question. arranging circumstances to match the reality you maintain internally. This is where momentum crescendos. Life flows in synchrony with your chosen assumptions, producing a sense of ease, joy, and inevitability. This is how subtle influence governs. Your thoughts and emotions ripple outward, naturally shaping people, opportunities, and environments in harmony with your inner world. This is where certainty solidifies. Trust in the law of assumption transforms doubt into a faint echo, irrelevant to the reality you assume. This is how empowerment blossoms. No ritual, external approval, or hard work is needed beyond sustained inner conviction. This is where the legacy is engraved. Neville Goddard left a roadmap showing that life is a conscious creation, and every individual has the power to assume, feel, and live their desires into existence. This is how the vision completes. Imagination, assumption, and feeling converge to make you not a passive participant, but the architect of reality itself. This is where understanding transcends technique. The law of assumption becomes identity, a permanent lens through which life is experienced and shaped. This is where the story closes yet continues. In mastering assumption, you inherit Neville's timeless legacy, carrying forward the knowledge that reality itself is yours to create.